Hello guys, and welcome back to a new video in this series. So today we're going to discuss about matrices data structures in R, and we're going to discuss on how to create matrices, that is the different methods of creating matrices. We're also going to cover how to access data elements in a matrices, how to change or update data elements in matrices, and finally we're going to also cover how to name the columns and rows of matrices. So let's get started. What is a matrix? A matrix is data elements that are arranged in rows and columns. So it's just generally arrangement of data in rows and columns having two dimensions. And how do we create them in R? So in R we have a variety of methods that you can use to create matrices, and the first one you're going to see is using the matrix function. You can also bind vectors to create a matrix. Then finally you can, maybe you have a vector and you also want to convert it into a matrix, you can use the dimensions, the dimension. So how does a matrix look like? Now this is a sample matrix and this is a 2 by 2 matrix, and this one stands for the rows, and these are the columns. So that means if you need to access this A, you need to get the number of the row number and the column number. So this is how a matrix looks. You can have a 2 by 2 matrix, 3 by 3 matrix, you can have a 5 by 5 matrix, no matter the size you want. So we're also going to, in naming, we're going to first look at the matrix function, and then finally, and we can also look at the call names and the row names functions, which is a very good important functions that can be used for naming matrices. Finally, the last thing that we're going to look at is how can we access data elements in a matrix. So we have to access them using these indexes, that is the I and J, which I stands for the number, the row number, and J stands for the column number. We can also going to look, we're also going to look at the logical vector. Then we're also going to look for the character vector. Of course, this is on the where we have the named matrices, and then to modify it we can either change the rows into columns and columns into rows, which is what we're calling transpose. So we're going to also going to modify a matrix using the transpose function, and then finally we're going to edit or update elements in a matrix. So let's get to the coding part. So let's just go and open your R. Open your R. So I have already created my R script, which is the matrix.r. So the first thing that I want us to look at, let us creating a matrix. Creating a matrix. Okay. So the first technique that we're going to use is the matrix function. So let's get started. We can create a row wise. Maybe I want to fill it in row wise format. I'll show you what that, I'll tell you in a minute what that means. So we can create our first matrix and call it mat1. mat1 using the matrix function. So the data is going to be, we can just assign some few value 1, 2, 3, 4. And then one important thing about RStudio, as you can see guys, I have, when you type the function, it is just directing you on what you're supposed to input next. So it's going to be the end row, which is the number of rows. Now since our data is has 4 elements, the number of rows, let's just keep it 2. And then the number of columns, you can also keep it 2. Now by default you see that by row is going to be false, so I want us to just include it by row equals to, since we're just going to fill it row wise, let's include it and say true, and to show you what that really means. So let's look at it. Let's see what that mat1 looks like. Let's see how that looks like. Now as you can see here guys, this is our matrix 1. Now we have the value 1 2 3 4, and we have told it to fill it by row, so that means it's going to fill this data row wise. So we have the first value element 1 2 3 4, so that's what we mean by row wise. So what if we wanted to do that in a column wise manner? So you can just copy this, paste it here, then we change this to column. So here we're just going to say to just put it false. Now when you look at this, there's a difference. So this one is going to fill it column wise, so it's going to start 1 2 3 4. Now what if we wanted to look at the dimensions of our matrix? You can just do that using dim mat1. It's supposed to give us 2 by 2 matrix, so those are the dimensions. So this just generally means it has 2 rows and it has two columns. So that is how we create a matrix when we are using the matrix function. The second technique we can look at is binding vectors. We can call this mat2. Okay, before we do that, let's just create our vectors. We have not created them, so we can just define a simple vector like 1 2 3, and then y, we just call it c 1 2 3. So this is a vector. Of course we covered vectors in the previous video. If you have not done that, you can go and check out the previous video called vectors. So when you run those two, so we create our own matrix. Let's call it mat2. And then now in this case, let us start with row wise. We're going to do this row wise using the cbind function. So no, the rbind I mean. So we have two functions that can be used to combine vectors. We have the rbind function, which stands for row bind, and we also have the cbind function. Of course we're going to see that later. So let's check at our mat2. How does it look like? So it has combined our two matrices, our two vectors I mean, into a single okay, let's try to differentiate this so that we can know, we can see 4 5, and this one we can just say 6. Yeah, so it's going to fill it row wise. So it's going to be 1 2 3 4 5 6. So what if you wanted to do that column wise? We can just copy this, just copy that, and then we change this to column wise, and then yeah, so just it's going to be cbind. Can do that. As you can see, it's going to be doing it row wise, column wise I mean. So we're going to have 1 2 3 4 5 6. So this is a way that you can create matrices. We've looked at two methods. So the other technique that we can look at is using the dimension functions, the dimensional function. So we can we have this vector x. What if I wanted to convert this into a matrix? What if I want to convert this into a matrix? Okay, just a minute. Let's define a new x. That's not gonna work. Then we give it 1 2 3 and 4. So we have a new vector called x. So what if we want to convert that into a matrix? So we can just simply do that by doing dim, which stands for dimensions of x. Then we assign it to a 2 by 2. And then when we look at our new x, it's going to be a matrix. of course, which has been filled column wise, because that's by default. It's going to do that, filling it in a default manner. So the next thing that we can look at is naming. We can see how we can naming a matrix, because as you can see here, we've been we have these vectors x, mat1, mat2, matrices I mean, but we have just as you can see, when we look at the call names of vector of this matrix, is giving us null. Let's try this mat1. It's also giving us null. So we have not named, they don't have any names for now. When you look at this matrix right here, this is just the row number. So this is row 1, this is row 2, this is column 1, and this is column number 2. So in the next video, I want us to see how we are going to name them and assign them names. So see you in the next video, guys.